Okay, in lesson 4.1, we said that Greek nouns change their form, they change their endings, depending on what they're doing in a sentence. So they'll take different endings or decline, depending on whether they're being the subject or the direct object or the indirect object in the sentence. Now, families of nouns that take similar endings are called declensions. And so we're going to start looking at nouns by looking at the first declension, a family of nouns that take similar endings. Before we begin, though, we have to say one thing about accent. So we learned that verbs have recessive accent. That is to say, the accent on a verb goes back as far as it can according to the rules of accent. Nouns, though, have persistent accent. What this means is that the accent wants to stay on the same syllable as far as it can. Again, depending on the rules of accent. So when you learn a new noun, you're going to learn where the accent wants to be on that noun. So here's a noun, Hesukia, and you can see that the accent is right there above the iota. This is the nominative singular of this word. It means leisure. So the accent wants to be there above the penult, above the iota, and it's going to stay there as long as staying there doesn't break the rules for accent. And we're going to practice this with various nouns as we learn the new endings as well. So we're going to start with the noun te'a. It's a first declension long alpha stem. That is to say, in the nominative singular, it has a long alpha at the end. And these long alpha stems, you're going to see them after epsilon, rho, and iota. Now this one, te'a, happens to be accented on the ultima in the nominative singular. You can see that acute accent right there. It's a little hard to see above the long mark. So this is the nominative singular, te'a. This is the form that it's going to take when it's being, for example, the subject of a verb. So te'a, nominative singular, te'as, genitive singular, so of the goddess, te'ai, that's the dative singular. So that's the case it would be in, for example, if it's being an indirect object. Te'on, accusative singular, if it's being, say, a direct object. And finally, te'a, the vocative. Now, the vocative is a case we didn't talk about before, but the vocative case is for direct address. So if you say, "Oh goddess, hear my prayer," you're going to use the vocative case. "Oh goddess," the case of direct address. So, and very often, the vocative looks just exactly like the nominative. So there's the singular, nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and vocative. And then here's the plurals, te'ai, te'on, te'ais, te'as, te'ai. Okay, so there's the singular and plural in all 5 cases, right? Let's take a look at what the accent does. So you see, we said before that it wants to be accented on the ultima above that A. And if you look down all the cases, you can see that it does stay accented. There's always an accent over the ultima, but, and this is a rule for first declension nouns, if they want to be accented on the ultima, that accent changes to a circumflex in the genitive and dative singular and plural. Okay, so it's an acute everywhere else, circumflex on the genitive and dative singular and plural. All right, so that's our first noun. Now we're going to look at another first declension noun that's just a tiny bit different. And this is hesukia. Okay, so it's again a long alpha stem. You can see that long alpha ending on the nominative singular. The difference with this one is just a difference of accentuation. So when you memorize this noun, You learn that the accent wants to be there above the iota. So it's accented on its penult, its second to last syllable, which happens to be short. And this is actually the easiest thing, right? It stays exactly the same and acute over the iota throughout, except here. Look, it's a circumflex over that omega. And this is true of all first declension nouns. The genitive plural always has a circumflex over that ultima. Other than that, the accentuation of this is super easy. The accent gets to stay just exactly where it wants to be over that iota. All right, here's yet one more long alpha stem, and it's Cora, countryside. Again, it's accented on the penult, but now this is a long vowel. Omega is a long vowel. And so this is going to make a couple of small differences. Mostly, it's exactly the same, right? But here, it's still accented over that omega. But, and here's another exception, the final I, alpha iota, in the nominative and vocative plural of first declension nouns counts as short, even though it's a diphthong, it counts as short for purposes of accentuation. So then you have, right, I'm going to write it out. Then you have cori. It wants to be accented over this omega, and it can be, but because this is long, the omega is long, and the alpha iota counts as short, it's got to be a circumflex. Anytime that you have a word that's accented on its penult, where that's long, where the ultima is short, it's got to be a circumflex. So we have a circumflex there and there. And then, because it's a first declension noun, it's got a circumflex accent above the ultima in the genitive plural. All right, so here's another kind of first declension noun, another subgroup of this family of nouns, and this is an eta stem. And it's going to work pretty much like the ones we've just seen, except instead of having the long alpha, it has an eta. Okay, you see the long alpha after iota, rho, and epsilon, and the eta after other letters. So skene, skenes, skene, skenane, skene. A little different, right? It's got the eta instead of the long alpha. And then the plural, exactly the same as the long alpha stems we already saw. Skenai, skenon, with the circumflex over the omega. Skenais, skenas, skenai. Okay, so the plural, exactly like the ones we've seen before. The singular, we have eta instead of long alpha. Notice, because this wants to be accented over its ultima, that accent changes to a circumflex in the genitive and dative, singular and plural. Okay? And that's it. So first declension nouns, a couple of subgroups, long alpha and eta. And then we got to play with the accents a little bit too.